o'clock. I think we should get started. Welcome to this community forum hosted by Begin, the second in a series. These opening remarks, if you were here last week, will sound quite familiar. If you were not here, however, I want to make sure you kind of have the background for where these came from and where they may be going in the future. Begin is the acronym for Brookfield-Elm Interfaith Network, and we are a group of religious leaders and people of faith and spiritually inquisitive people who meet monthly from a broad array of traditions in our communities. Our purposes are fairly simple. We exist to make sure that there is open communication between the religious groups in our communities. We exist to learn from each other, and we exist to see where we can work cooperatively for the betterment of our community. Finally, we exist over time because we realize that faith and spirit are so essential to the human experience and add so much to the human experience. We are also aware, though, that faith and spirit and religious traditions that go with them can often be a source of divisiveness and hurt in our world. And while we can't change all of that on a worldwide basis, we can at least make sure locally that we know each other and that we talk to each other often enough so that if differences do arise, there is a level of trust already built up that allows us to perhaps handle those things in a constructive fashion rather than a destructive fashion. For 6 years now, Begin has hosted a community Thanksgiving celebration held on a rotating basis in our various buildings and meeting places, and those have been really well received. And so we decided, what's the next logical step for a group like this? And these forums are the result. I know in my particular religious setting, I often have people approach me and say, could you please explain what Muslims believe, or the difference between an Orthodox and a Reformed Jew, or how a Methodist might understand communion differently than a Baptist or a Roman Catholic. And of course, any of us in the Begin group could take a stab at answering those questions, but I think all of us also feel that the best answers come directly from a person of that tradition. Better to hear directly than by a third-party source. And so we kind of are beginning that process tonight, talking very broadly on purpose over these 2 weeks, last week and this week, on the basic question of how does each tradition understand God, and then how is that reflected in how we pray or worship. We heard from 4 speakers last week, 4 additional speakers this week. Our hope is to have all of these posted on YouTube so that if you missed last week, for example, you would be able to look it up and watch them. And we'll try and get that word out to our various religious communities, newsletters, and websites. Here's how the process works. Tonight you're going to hear from 4 speakers. And I should allow you to see who those speakers are. There are their names and titles and descriptions of what they'll be presenting on. They will each present for 12 minutes, and when they finish, we'll pause for maybe 2 or 3 minutes and take questions from you. We're hoping solely on matters of clarification. If you didn't hear something or understand something that someone said, we could clarify it at that point, and we'd like to limit that part of it to just 2 or 3 minutes. Once we've heard from all 4 speakers, then we will still have a good 20-25 minutes at the end for general questions for any of the speakers. And at that point, we'd ask you to just raise your hand and try and direct your question to one of the 4 speakers in particular. You also should have received this evening note cards and hopefully something to write with, or perhaps you could borrow that from a neighbor. If you're not the type of person who likes to raise their hand and ask a question in a public setting like this, simply write it on the note cards. We'll collect those at the end of the 4 presentations, and then when we get to the Q&A at the end, we'll alternate back and forth between questions from the floor and questions from the cards. Also, when we get to that point, there are 4 clipboards on the center aisle in which we're hoping will get passed around so that you can give us feedback on questions and topics you would hope that we would address in future forums like this, or suggestions for how we could perhaps have done this better or differently. We've got some great suggestions from last week's group. We'd appreciate any that you have for us this week. Thank you so much, by the way, to our hosts here at Elmbrook Community Hospital. They've been just wonderful to work with, especially Susan, who's in back kind of watching the door back there. And please help yourself to their refreshments at any time over the course of the evening. Does that all make sense? All right. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm John Horner-Ibler. I'm the current convener of the Begin group, one of the pastors at Cross of Life Lutheran Church, just a little bit west of here on North Avenue. And it falls to me to make sure that we stay on schedule this evening, so I'm done. Kathleen Rainier is good enough to be our first speaker this evening, so I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen, and we're going to make a transfer of the microphone.